Welcome to the 9th lecture in this module, where we're going to talk about the future of cannabis-based medicines and a little bit about the pharmaceutical interest in cannabis-based medicines. So why is it important to cover this in this module? Well, the cannabis-based medicines or cannabinoid-based medicines is one of the fastest growth areas in the pharmaceutical industry, so in traditional drug discovery development. And so there's an awful lot of work being done in this area. There's an awful lot of companies getting involved in cannabinoid-based medicines, which means there's a lot more clinical research being done, and there's a lot more jobs and industry in this area. The work that's being done is really uncovering novel and niche research areas and disease indications that maybe we hadn't traditionally realized cannabis-based medicines could be useful in. So there's one real bonus of this kind of the green rush is that it's really telling us some of the new and novel areas that cannabis-based medicines can be useful in. And having licensed products, so products that have been proved to be effective for certain symptoms, allow for specialists to prescribe those specific products. And in some indications, it's really important that we have that ability for specialists to prescribe specific products at doses that we know are effective and have been proven to work. And so I think in areas like epilepsy, it's really important that we know what are the compounds that work and what doses do we give them at, what do we need to be aware of, what are the contraindications, because these are really, life-threatening diseases where you don't want to be getting it wrong. And this means having more licensed medicines means that we have greater patient access, and this is especially true in countries where medicinal cannabis isn't legal or where the prescription of medicinal cannabis isn't particularly widespread. So, for example, in the UK, it's very difficult to get medicinal cannabis unless you go to a private consultant. You can't get it on our National Healthcare Service, but you can get a licensed cannabis-based medicine as long as it has been proven to be effective and is recommended in clinical guidelines. So the more licensed products we have, globally, the greater patient access that we get. But just in more general terms, the more randomized controlled trials that we do in this arena and with cannabis-based medicines strengthens our general evidence base, whether you want something to be on prescription or whether you're self-managing your symptoms. The more that we know, the more research that we do, the more that we understand about this topic. So really it's of benefit to everybody to have this kind of research ongoing. This is a graph that I drew up last year to really highlight how the clinical evidence and the amount of clinical trials that are being conducted in this space is really growing at an exponential rate. So if you look at the x-axis, this is time, so really starting from the 1960s when we had the first discovery of the cannabinoid or the phytocannabinoid chemicals THC and CBD. And that kind of spurred on, and on the y-axis we have the number of randomized controlled trials. And this is according to published literature. And remember that not everything that gets done gets published. So there will be more clinical trials that have been carried out, but that just weren't published in publicly accessible journals. So the initial discovery of THC did spur on a reasonable amount of clinical research, and you can see between the kind of 70s and really the noughties, they're bobbed along at being maybe 5 to 10 clinical trials being published per year, and this really focused on the nausea suppressing and appetite stimulating effects of THC. And you can see that nabilone and dronabinol were licensed in the early 80s for these indications. So a lot of the evidence for them came really quite early, before we had even discovered the CB1 and CB2 receptors, which happened just at the turn of the noughties. And that really did actually spur on quite a lot of clinical research and got a lot of more pharmaceutical companies interested in this area because we knew what the molecular targets were for THC, and that meant that we could try and synthesize compounds that would activate these receptors or block these receptors. And so the discovery of the CB1 and the CB2 receptor really helped to kickstart an increase in the amount of clinical research that was being done. And that was really accompanied by several places, California particularly, and Canada, and then various US states from 2010 onwards. Those series of legalizations of medicinal cannabis really helped as well, because actually when you're trying to do clinical research in a country that where medical cannabis is illegal, it's quite difficult. You know, you come up against an awful lot of roadblocks that you might not experience if you were trying to develop different types of drugs. So the global legalization of medicinal cannabis has really helped in general terms to just normalize the use of medicinal cannabis, which helps to allow more clinical trials to take place. And the discovery of the CB1 and CB2 receptor kind of propagated a lot of research. A lot of companies started looking at synthetic agonists of CB1. They were really trying to promote these as analgesics, but as it turned out, they didn't. The synthetic compounds that were made didn't do very well in this arena, and they also made the CB1 receptor antagonist, rimonabant, which was licensed about in 2007, depending on the country that you're in, but kind of midway between 2000 and 2010, rimonabant came on the market, but then quickly left. But you know, that phase of research contributed a lot to these to this increase in randomized controlled trials. And then Sativex was licensed around 2010 for MS, and that was off the back of a number of clinical trials as well. And then Epidiolex just more recently. But you can see that there's been a real exponential growth. And now, when you look at the yearly number of clinical trials, randomized clinical trials that are being published with a cannabinoid-based medicine, we're looking at around 100 articles per year, and this only continues to grow, and I think in the future we're just going to see this continue to grow in this kind of exponential manner. When we look at the first phase of that clinical research, so between the 70s and the noughties, it was really unfocused. So there was an awful lot of different disease indications that were being probed. You know, we had a lot of anecdote about what medical cannabis could be used for, and researchers were really looking at all different aspects of kind of therapeutic areas that cannabis-based medicines could be useful for. And some of these we don't see anymore. So some areas, for example, that we just don't see an awful lot of active research in anymore would be anything in asthma or cardiovascular diseases. We don't see an awful lot of work anymore in memory and perception, or let me see what else. Yeah, actually, probably, yeah. So there's some areas which have kind of died away over time, and then you can see some of these areas are still areas of focus. But the point of the graph is that it was very diverse, so there was no real dominance of a particular indication other than really intraocular pressure. So that was quite a significant area of research for a while, when people were looking at whether or not cannabinoids could be used to reduce intraocular pressure. But it was quite a mixed bag of research. And then if you look at the second phase of research, so from the noughties now, you can see that now it's a lot more focused. Most of the published clinical studies that have come in the past 20 years have focused on pain. That's by far the predominant area of research. And then we still have a lot of the same things cropping up: epilepsy, anxiety, eating disorders, so the same kind of things, diabetes that we've been talking about in the past, number of lectures. They're still all in there, but just not as expansive as the amount of research that's been done in pain, which I try to highlight in the pain lecture. It's by far the area in which we have the most clinical evidence. So kind of looking forward then at the projected market size of where cannabis-based medicines could be. So this graph, it's a US-based projection, but really similar graphs are obtained across the world, really, when people are estimating what the market is going to look like in the future. And right now in 2020, the majority of the market comes from recreational and medicinal cannabis. And the pharmaceutical cannabinoid-based market is much smaller. So at the moment, it's estimated to be about 2 billion compared to about 23 billion in the recreational and medicinal arena. But in the next 10 years, that's really projected to grow an awful lot for both sectors. So we're going to see a big increase in recreational and medicinal use of cannabis-based medicines, but we're also going to see a really big expansion in this, or this is what is predicted to occur in cannabinoid-based pharmaceuticals. And it is estimated that in 10 years, this could be worth £100 billion, and that the number of consumers will grow because of that, because you will have prescribable cannabinoid products available. So this is projected to be a massive market in the future, and it's part of the reason why there are so many companies getting involved in that and doing a lot more clinical research, which is, as I said, good to everybody. So what kind of strategies are pharmaceutical companies trying to pursue in order to take what we know about the use of phytocannabinoids and understanding the endocannabinoid system and turning that into medicines? And in my opinion, it really kind of falls broadly into three categories. So the first is using what nature gave us in the plant. So using plant-derived compounds, and this could be either pure compounds or compounds in various different combinations, and putting them in either novel formulations, so new ways of mixing them, applying them, put them in solution or tablets, or new delivery mechanisms. So can we get these cannabinoids into our bodies better than the traditional routes of administration? And the pharmaceutical products that we have at the moment are either oral or sublingual. So if you think about dronabinol or Epidiolex or Sativex, they're all given orally, either swallowed or put under the tongue. In this arena, particularly, what companies are trying to do is trying to create new intellectual property. So you can't just make a bog standard CBD medication and try and patent it, because there's too much prior knowledge out there about CBD. So you've got to do something different. And so part of the reason why they're looking for novel formulations or novel delivery mechanisms or novel combinations of compounds is in order to have that intellectual property, which is required in drug development, because you may remember I said that getting a drug through the phases of clinical development to phase 3 and getting approval costs an awful lot of money. And so to do that, you really have to think that at the end of it, you're going to have some protection, some intellectual property over the product. That means that you will be able to reclaim some of that cost back. And that's a major reason why we don't have as much phase 3 clinical research, is because people haven't been willing to invest in that, certainly with whole plant products, because of the inability to protect that data if they were to acquire it. So you've got the plant-based strategy, which some companies are pursuing. And then you've got the kind of what would be possibly called the more traditional medicinal chemistry type strategy, where you look at designing new molecules that somehow interact with the endocannabinoid system. So typically that would be molecules that either activate or block the CB1 or the CB2 receptor, although I can't think of a single indication where you would want to block CB2, but there are indications in which you might want to block CB1. So, or it could be designing molecules to inhibit the enzymes or to inhibit the transport mechanisms of endocannabinoids. But these are all, this is medicinal chemistry where you are coming up with new structures, designing completely new molecules that you would have intellectual property on that interact with the cannabinoid receptors. And then the third strategy, which overlaps a little bit with the second strategy, is using medicinal chemistry to design molecules that specifically try and modulate the endocannabinoid system. So, and that's typically by inhibiting their degradation enzymes, which there are at least 3 enzymes that we know are quite important in degrading endocannabinoids. So people are trying to create molecules that will block them specifically and can be used to upregulate different endocannabinoids, or blocking their transport mechanisms, so stopping them from being moved around in a cell, which really modulates their function. So these are the 3 basic strategies, and we'll talk about each of them in a little bit more detail, giving examples of companies that are pursuing each of those strategies with different types of molecules and in what disease areas they're looking. So first, some of the companies in this space. So this is a list of some of the companies who are particularly looking at phytochemicals as their drug discovery pipeline. So we've got companies like Insys, who actually have now gone out of business, and I'm not sure what's going on with their cannabidiol program at the moment. Tilray, Corbus, Tetra, Zynerba, Arena, GW, Calaterra, Botanics. There's an awful lot of companies out there who are making products. Most of them you can see are cannabidiol based. Because cannabidiol has had so much interest of late, and because it was approved globally now, this has really paved the way for companies to try and make me toos, so other cannabidiols that they think could be effective in epilepsy, or making cannabidiol medications for different indications, so trying to carve out their space there in a different disease area. So we've had a real expansion in cannabidiol clinical research off the back of the fact that cannabidiol was FDA approved. Part of the reason for that is that because it's already approved, it makes it easier to try and go in to a different disease indication, because you can say this is a compound that's already being used in epilepsy. We know a lot about the side effect profile, and so it just makes it easier getting through some of those regulatory and ethical hurdles when you can use a compound that has previous exposure in man and that you know a lot about. And so the indications that people are looking at with compounds, some of them we've covered already through the lectures that we've done: epilepsy, anxiety, various types of inflammatory and autoimmune disorders, gastrointestinal problems, pain of various different forms, neurological disorders like autism, and actually there's not an awful lot of other neurological disorders in that list there, but you can see it's a lot of things that we've already talked about is being pursued by these companies. And there are some other companies as well, some maybe bigger companies like Johnson and Roche, who are looking more in that second kind of theme of second and third theme of research strategies, which is developing novel compounds that are either CB2 agonists or CB1 antagonists or enzyme inhibitors, and looking to make medicines that way. And you can see they're looking in areas such as diabetes and autism spectrum disorder, CNS disorders, Tourette syndrome, nausea and vomiting. So again, many of the disorders that we've already covered through this module.